So we've talked about how the memory of a program is made up of a stack and a heap, where the stack stores primitive data and the heap stores objects, generally speaking. And today we're looking more into how the stack, or you could also call it the call stack, is structured, because it's made up of different stack frames corresponding to each method that's called or invoked during the runtime of a program. So here we have an example program, and we have the call stack over here. This example program has a number of methods. Let's just quickly go over what the methods are doing. So we have cookie tax rate, which declares an int called tax rate with a value of 2, and then it just returns that. So this method always just returns 2. We have cookie tax, which takes in a number of cookies. It gets the tax rate, subtracts that from the number of cookies, and then returns the amount of cookies after tax. Then we have print cookies, which also takes in a number of cookies. It concatenates strings together to create the message, I have the number of cookies, yum, and then it prints that message that it created. And then we have the main method. So when we run this program, Java starts execution at the main method, because that's always where it starts execution. It always starts at the main method. And it's going to start, of course, at the first line of the main method. So in our call stack right now, we just have a stack frame for the main method. This should actually say line 1. So the stack frame keeps track of the location in memory of the current instruction, but we can just think of that as Java knows the method that corresponds to this stack frame, and it knows the line that we left off on, or the line that we're currently on. So currently we're on line 1, and this is for the main method. Now on the first line, we declare an int called myCookies and initialize it to 3. So inside the stack frame, we also store this primitive variable, myCookies. We store its value, which is 3. Now, we've learned before that data inside the stack is stored as 0s and 1s. So this int would be stored as 32 bits, 32 0s and 1s, because integers are 32 bits in Java. But just to simplify, we are abstracting the call stack. That is, we are representing it in simpler, easier to understand terms, just for the sake of demonstration. So we just need to know that this stack frame contains the number 3, because that's the value of this variable. So now we can move on to line 2. Now on line 2, we are invoking a method. So we are going to create a new stack frame for that method. And once again, the stack frame knows what method it is and what line we're on. Something else to note though is that when we invoke this method, we are passing in myCookies, which currently is 3, or we can see it in the stack frame. myCookies is 3, and the name of the parameter in this method, print cookies, it's just calling it cookies. So we're passing in 3 for the value of cookies within this stack frame. So in the print cookies stack frame, the variable cookies is getting the value 3. So we are storing that in the stack frame. Now on line 1, we are creating a string called message. Once again, if you recall, strings are actually stored in the heap. So this is actually in the stack frame, it'll actually store an address to this string. But again, we're just abstracting this. We're making it simpler for demonstration. So let's just say the stack frame knows that message is I have, and then it's concatenating the value of cookies, which is 3. So I have 3 cookies, yum. And so that's the value of message, which is specific to this stack frame. Now, since each of these stack frames is separate, they each have their own scope. So if in print cookies you tried to refer to my cookies, if you tried to say like print my cookies, it wouldn't be able to because my cookies doesn't exist in the scope of this method. My cookies isn't in this stack frame. We're only looking at one stack frame at a time. But that's why we can pass in data. So we pass in the value for my cookies, which is 3, and it just gets stored in this parameter, which is called cookies. So every variable that's declared in a method only exists within the scope of that method. And blocks like for loops also have their own scopes. That's why you can make you can make an iterator variable inside the for loop, and then also create a new variable called I somewhere else in the program in the same method, because I only exists within the scope of the for loop. Anyway, so that's line 1 of print cookies, is giving a value to the string and kind of storing it in memory. So now you can move on to line 2 of print cookies. So what are we doing in line 2? Line 2, we are actually invoking another method, which is the print method. I'm not going to make a stack frame for that because we don't actually know what the print method does, because that's just like part of Java. So I'm not going to make a stack frame for that, but there would be one in the call stack. I'm just skipping it because we don't really know the internal implementation of the print method, or at least I don't know it off the top of my head. So we're just skipping this part of the program. So, okay, let's say we went through the print method and we came back out. Okay. Now we can move on to line 3, except there is no line 3 of this method. It's the end of the method. So since we're at the end of the method, Java knows to return. Where are we going to return? Well, we can look at the stack frame underneath this one, which is the main stack frame, and we can see that we were on line 2. So we are going to return to our previous location in the stack frame below this one. And we aren't returning a value. There's no return statement, so we don't have to worry about that right now. So we're done with this method. So that stack frame is removed, and we're back in main. We're back in line 2. Okay, so we just finished line 2. So now we're going to move on to the next line. If I can edit this. So line 3 is just a blank line. So what about line 4? Line 4 is changing the value of my cookies, but we are calling a method, and the result of that method is going to be the new value of my cookies. So we don't actually know yet what my cookies is going to be, but we know that we're changing it. So right now, we don't know the state of my cookies. It depends on the result of this new method. So we're calling cookie tax. So now we have to make a new stack frame for cookie tax, and then we're going to jump to the first line of that method. But of course, once again, we are passing in the current value of my cookies, which is 3. And so cookie tax also calls its parameter cookies. So in this stack frame, we have that the value of cookies is 3, because again, we're passing in my cookies, which previously was 3. And then we're going to update my cookies with the result of this method. Okay, so we've jumped to the first line of cookie tax. what is in the first line? We're declaring an int called tax, and we're calling another method to get this value. So we have this variable called tax, but we don't know what its value is yet. We are invoking another method. So we have to add on another stack frame. We create a stack frame for cookie tax rate. And then we jump to the start of cookie tax rate, the first line. There isn't any input parameters, so we don't have any of that sort of thing in the stack frame. The only thing in the stack frame right now, on line 1, is this int that we've declared called tax rate, which has a value of 2. So in the stack frame, we see tax rate has a value of 2. And yeah, so we've stored that in the stack frame, so now we can move on to line 2. Okay, line 2 of this program is returning. So we have an explicit return statement, and it's saying that we are returning with a value. That value is tax rate, which is 2. So that means this is going to be copied into tax, because back here, where we were in the previous stack frame, cookie tax line 1, we were setting the value of tax to whatever this method evaluates to, or whatever it's returning. It's returning 2, so that's going into tax. So since we are returning, we can get rid of this stack frame. And now we know that tax is 2. Oh, let me delete these lines also. Okay. So, let's see. We are on line 1. Okay, so we just finished line 1. Tax now has its value, so we can move on to line 2 of this method. Okay. So, line 2 of cookie tax, we are changing the value of cookies. The value of cookies is going to be the current value of cookies minus tax. Okay, so the current value of cookies is 3, tax is 2, 3 minus 2 is 1, so the value of cookies is going to be updated to be 1. So we changed that within this stack frame. So now we have a new value in the stack for this variable. And that's the end of that line, so we can move on to line 3. Line 3 is blank, so we move on to line 4. Line 4 is a return statement. Again, another explicit return call. So we are returning a value. That value is cookies, which is now 1. Let's look at where we were in the stack frame below. That is where we are going to return to. That's line 4 of the main method, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it seems like this value that we are returning is going to be the new value of my cookies. So we're returning cookies. So cookies is being copied into my cookies. So my cookies gets a value of 1. And we are returning from cookie tax. So we can delete this stack frame. And now we know we can jump back to the main method at line 4. Okay. So now that my cookies has its new value, line 4 is complete. We can move on to the next line. Line 5 is blank. Line 6 is another method invocation. Print cookies. And we are passing in a value. We're passing in my cookies. The current value of my cookies is 1. So let's create a new stack frame for my cookies. And once again, a new stack frame for print cookies. We create a new stack frame for print cookies. And once again, the name of the parameter or the input or the argument, whatever you want to call it, of this method is cookies. So this is going into here, which means this is going into here, which means cookies has a value of 1. And we are starting at line 1 of print cookies. So that's the current location in our stack frame. So, okay, line 1 of print cookies. We are creating a string called message. It's going to say I have the number of cookies, which is 1. So I have 1 cookies yum. So that's the value of message that's stored in the heap, but the stack knows the address of this string. Okay, so now we can move on to line 2 because that line is done. We created the variable and stored it in memory. So line 2. Line 2 is printing. Again, print is also a method, so there's going to be a new stack frame, but I'm not going to go through it. So let's pretend it already went through that and then returned, and now we deleted that stack frame. Okay, we're done with line 2 of print cookies. So we can move on to the next line, except there is no next line. It's the end of the method. There's no explicit return statement. We're not returning any data. So we can just jump back to our previous location in the program, which was the main method at line 6. We just look at the stack frame below this one to know where to go. And we're done with that stack frame. Okay, main method, line 6. Well, it looks like we finished that line. We can move on to the next line, but that's actually the last line of main. So now that main's over, main is returning, and that just means the end of the program. So now the program stops execution. Yay!